Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Jaden. I'm a King James Bible teacher based in New York City. And today's study is going to be the next in the Covenants of Dispensationalism series. It's going to be on the Noahic covenant. Now, the Noahic covenant is going to follow Adam's covenant, but now that the transition is starting to take place, going from Adam to Noah, we're going to have to look at a lot of different specific details on salvation that I didn't cover in the Adam video. The reason I didn't cover in the Adam video is because we're starting to get closer to the law of Moses. And this is where you're going to start seeing stuff change in the Bible. So before I go into the specifics of the covenant, I first have to show you the general timeline, okay? So we're going to start with just a review real quick, okay? Just a review. We're going to start with this right here. So we begin in the Bible with Adam and Eve in the garden, right? And then God tells them that in the day that thou eatest thereof, referring to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die, right? Now, the problem is that what did they do? Well, they disobey God. So, yeah, you can see that. So they disobey God. Adam and Eve, they disobey him. And that marks the end of that dispensation. So, just to reiterate again, what is a dispensation? A dispensation is not a time period. It's simply how God is doing a dealing with certain people. When God changes that program to deal with people a certain way, that dispensation ends. But you can't make fixed divisions in time and call them dispensations and then go to those verses in the New Testament. Because the verses in the New Testament are not talking about that. They're talking about God dispensing something, right? So in this case, God has this dispensation. And like I said, the other teachers and stuff, I agree, they call it innocence. Because Adam and Eve were morally innocent. Now, what was given under this innocence section? It's called the Edenic covenant. Edenic. Why is it called Edenic? Because just to review, it's named after the Garden of Eden. So it's called the Edenic covenant, right? Now, the thing is about this covenant is, like I pointed out to you, this thing is still in effect for little babies and children, right? You should already know that because I mentioned that in the first video on the series. Now, this is why you can't go by time periods. Sure, the time period has ended with them being kicked out of the garden, but the covenant is still in effect for little babies and children. That's not fixed to this dispensation. That's why you can't be hyper focused on time periods. The hyper dispensationalists, like I said in the first video, they're trying to make everything left of one time period and everything right of one time period. That doesn't work. Now, there are certain periods in time, like what you're going to see right now, where there are elements of older dispensations that overlap future dispensations, right? But then there are some periods in time where it's an exception to the rule. So when we go into studying the Great Tribulation, you're going to see that that's one of the parts of history where everything is left of it and everything is right of it, because salvation is very special in the tribulation period. But for right now, there's overlap in every dispensation. So you can't just say, oh, well, that was only under the innocence dispensation. The Calvinists have to invent elect babies because they can't figure this out, right? So once Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, we're going to put purple. Once they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God then makes a new covenant with them. And I won't go over too much of this one because I went over in the last video. But basically, this one is called the Adamic covenant. Adamic. Now, this covenant, like I explained in that video, it like the Edenic covenant, it goes into effect from Genesis to Revelation. But once you get to the millennial kingdom, this covenant is partially lifted until the consummation of everything. And then once people eat of the tree of life, this covenant doesn't go into effect anymore because people won't die, right? But just to remember that we're about to enter a new dispensation now. We're no longer under innocence, generally. Are we under innocence or are we not under innocence? Well, just remember, like I said, the dispensation is gone, but it's still in effect for kids. This Adamic covenant is from Genesis to Revelation. Even if you're a saved Christian, you are still under this covenant. You still have to work and sweat and the earth is cursed and all that stuff, right? So that doesn't change, right? All right, Adam and Eve are given this covenant. Okay, now because they get kicked out of the garden, what is salvation? Salvation is by grace through faith. Hold on, hold on, hold on. This is where the Baptists they get messed up. They say, well, the historic position is that because Adam and Eve are saved by grace through faith, that means that there's no works. Yeah, but that's wrong. We're gonna go. This whole video is gonna be on that why that's wrong. Right? All right. Now, before I go into salvation specifics, I need to start dividing stuff for you. So Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden. He makes this covenant. They're saved by grace through faith. But what is the problem? The problem is that Adam and Eve are in the image were in the image of God, and then because they sinned, now they don't have the image. So you have this issue where they are a body, soul, spirit, right? They are a body, soul, and a spirit. Now, if he's a body, soul, spirit, when Adam sins in the Garden of Eden, his spirit dies. His spirit dies. Now, because his spirit dies, what did I say in that last video? How is God going to deal with humanity? Is he going to deal with them majority spiritually, or is he going to deal with them majority physically? He's going to deal with humanity majority physically. Because, like I showed you, the soul got stuck to the flesh. When a person sins, those physical sins are charged to their physical soul. So when a person dies in their iniquity, they go to hell. Right? Now, the thing is that, like I said, what ends up happening in the book of Genesis and onwards, how does God operate? Well, he shows up to Abraham as the angel of the Lord. Right? God does miraculous wonders. He comes to people in dreams. He comes to people in visions. So you can't say, oh, well, salvation is going to be the same by grace through faith because Adam was saved by grace through faith, etc. No, it doesn't work that way. You see, in this part of history that we're about to go through right now, the specifics, nobody is born again. Nobody is put in the body of Christ. You don't have anybody who is spiritually circumcised. No one's spirit is regenerated. None of that. Because the body of Christ is not there. Jesus hasn't died on the cross yet. Jesus may be there as the angel of the Lord, but he's not there as a man. So the circumstances are different. You understand? Now, if he has a dead spirit and nobody's born again from the time of Adam all the way to Jesus, then how could salvation be the same? You're confused. You know what I mean? It can't be the same. Now, yes, they are saved by grace through faith, but there are works to accompany it. How are the works accompanied? Through conscience. So let's look at some details here, okay? Let's look at some details here. I first want to start with the covenant. Genesis chapter 9. Genesis chapter 9. Now, in this video, I am not going to be going over the Noahic curse. So there's a prophecy about Noah's children that show up in this passage. I will not be going over that in this video because that's another long, drawn-out topic, okay? So I just want to focus on the covenant right now, okay? Now, make sure you go to the book of Genesis chapter 9, and you can just start looking over that chapter. I'll read you the parts I want you to focus on. But this part of the Bible is weird because it's called the Patriarch Dispensation. I'll have to put that title up here for you. It's called the Patriarch Dispensation. What does patriarch mean? Patriarch means the fathers. So what's weird is that so Adam and Eve gets kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You have this time period from Adam all the way to Noah. So we'll put Noah in blue because of the flood, right? So you have this time period from Adam all the way to Noah. Now, some people make even further divisions by adding Enoch. That's just, you don't have to do that. It doesn't really change anything. So you have Adam to Noah, right? And then you have from Noah to Abraham. So we'll put Abraham in brown, right? So you have Adam to Noah, Noah to Abraham. But what people start doing is they start to divide. They extra divide this total dispensation into individual sections, okay? So what do? They say from Adam and Eve to Noah, you're just going to have, you're going to enter this dispensation. But then when Noah shows up, you have government. Why do they add a subsection of this total section into Noah's part? Because in Adam and Eve, you just had humanity, but then Noah is when you start to get races and nations. So before Adam and Eve, you kind of just had humans, and then from Noah, you get his three children. You get his three children. You get Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, we're not going to go over the prophecy right now. I'm just going to give you basic details, okay? So from Noah, you have Shem, which are the Orientals. These are the Asians and all that stuff. From Ham, you have the basically everyone that's from Africa, okay? Well, and Egypt and all those places, right? So we'll put the black folk. And then from Japheth, this is where you get the European and their like mix, right? Okay, now God in the Tower of Babel, you know the story. The story in Tower of Babel is that humanity was trying to build a brick and mortar and they all wanted to get together in one world. And God intended it that the nations would be separated. So Ham had his inheritance, Japheth had his, Shem had his. The problem in the prophecy is that Ham was in a land that he was not supposed to be in. So God split up the nations and they went to their separate areas. Now, the thing is, when God split up their nations, what did he do it by? He did it by languages. He did it by languages. Okay. Now, because God separated the three races of people through languages, each respective race had to make up their own government. This is where you start getting, so Nimrod is the one who started Babel, but then from Nimrod, you start getting little nations that start to show up from this. And you know that because when Abraham shows up, you have the Mesopotamian kings are fighting. Well, if there are kings there, that means that there's governments. There's a system of a government there, right? So when you get from Adam to Noah, it's presumed that between Adam and Noah, there's no government. But then when the nations try to get together and God splits them up, then you have systems of government. Now, once you get to Abraham, what the Bible believers do is they add a subsection again, and they call this promise. They call this promise. Why do they call this promise? So we're gonna go over we're gonna focus on the Noah covenant today, but I'm just trying to give you a generality of what's going on here. Is that when Noah shows up and you have this government, this is still all the patriarch dispensation, but now what's happening is that Abraham is given a special covenant, which is the next video, that has nothing to do with this one. See, this covenant that God made with Noah is binding from Genesis to Revelation, like these other two are, right? But these covenants that God made with Noah, so watch it carefully, the covenant he made with Noah affects all of humanity. But you get to this covenant with Abraham, Abraham's covenant is something that he makes personally with Abraham that has to do with the nation of Israel, right? So notice how you have the institution of government that comes out of Noah's genealogy. And then from that, God makes a promise to Abraham. And that promise is related to the Noah covenant, but they don't have anything to do with each other. You see, God creates the nation of Israel from Abraham's seed, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But he couldn't do that unless there was first a system of government that was already instituted before then. There already had to be some development where humanity was going to start making governments in order to form a nation of Israel, right? So just in case you're not understanding, let's just go from the beginning because I'm going to start getting into really hyper specific now. You have the Edenic covenant, which is given under the Edenic dispensation. The dispensation ends, right? It ends when they're kicked out of the garden, but the covenant is in effect for little babies. When they get kicked out, you have the Adamic covenant. The Adamic covenant goes on from Genesis to Revelation. Once you get into the kingdom, stuff changes. But just for your general knowledge, this covenant is binding on every human being, saved or lost, doesn't matter. Now, once you get into this Adamic covenant and you go from Adam all the way to Abraham, all the way to Moses, Adam all the way to Moses, you're in a system called the Patriarch dispensation. What is the Patriarch dispensation? The Patriarch dispensation, it's called the Fathers. This is the part of the Bible that has to do with the Fathers. But what the Bible believers do is that in this Patriarch dispensation, they cut it down into two more portions. They say that this is In the patriarch dispensation, this is the start of the government subcategory. And then in the patriarch dispensation, this is where you get the promise subcategory. Because they're trying to show you changes within the dispensation as God is transferring to a new program. You understand what I'm getting at? Now, how did God form this system of government that created this subcategory? Through spreading the languages, by spreading the races, the Europeans and the black folk and the Orientals, right? But then once he does that, then he calls Abraham a Shemite, a Hebrew, and then he shows up. Then God starts to form his own nation from that. So now we're going to focus on this Noah's covenant. Now, just before I begin analyzing Noah's covenant, understand that from Adam to Moses, you're under the patriarch dispensation, right? Now, be warned. It's like I told you. I'm going to reiterate it again. You see how in this case, the Edenic covenant goes all the way through the Bible, but the dispensation has ended? Okay, there are going to be many elements of this dispensation that overlap with the law of Moses, including the covenants. Okay? So just keep that in mind. There's going to be elements of this that overlap all of this. God splitting up the races and the prophecy he gave to Noah goes throughout the whole Bible. That's not just this dispensation. But what I'm trying to illustrate to you here is that this is the beginning of when God started to change his program. But there are elements of this program that go beyond the dispensation. Okay. I'm just trying to hammer that down because when I'm going to start going through some details that you're going to get confused. Okay. So Genesis chapter 9. Genesis chapter 9. Okay, now God floods the planet, right? So when he floods the planet, Noah gets off the ark, and God decides that he's going to make a covenant with Noah. He's going to make a covenant with Noah. Let's see what that covenant is. Verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth. All right, so this is going to be the first part of the covenant. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the air, and upon every fowl of the air, and upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. So notice how in the beginning of this covenant, one of the conditions of it is that, not condition, but one of the things that God does is that he puts the fear of humanity in the animals. You know why that's important? What that's telling you is that before the flood, animals did not have fear of humans. And you know what the angels were doing? Go read Jude 7. Yeah. They were bestiality. That's where all the mythology comes from. With the gods being half centaur, half human. That's where they're getting that from. Yeah, it's gross. So for humanity's sake and for the animals' sake, he put the fear of the animals in them so that wouldn't happen. And you know, it's still disgusting. There are people that still practice that nasty sin today. What's wrong with people? All right, verse 3. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. Okay, so Noah's being given the commission that matches Adam's commission. But now notice extra conditions. Verse 4, but the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. All right, so let's go through some specific details. Okay, so the first thing that shows up in the Noahic covenant, I want to put the Noahic covenant in blue. Noahic covenant. Okay. Noahic covenant. What is the first thing? It says the fear of animals, or fear in animals. The next thing is that it says no eating blood. No eating blood. See that? So the Catholic Church talks about, oh, we drink the blood of Jesus at Mass and all that stuff. Yeah, before the law of Moses ever shows up, this is given in the Noahic covenant that is binding on every human being from Genesis to Revelation. That's nothing to do with the law of Moses, my dude. Catholicism is sanctified cannibalism, and you can't convince me otherwise. All right. Now it also says in verse 5, and surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. Okay, so look at here. One of the conditions of the Noahic covenant is the death penalty. Death penalty. The death penalty is not a civic law given by the law of Moses. The death penalty was given under this covenant, which means that all these governments that let out criminals who commit 40, 50 recidivist crimes, they can rape a woman and get out in a couple years. Yeah, that's not just. I think those people should get a chance to hear the gospel, but they should be put to death, because this is not talking about the law of Moses. It's not a civic law. This is an ordinance given by God under this covenant that is binding on everybody. You kill someone, you deserve to be killed. Anything you do that's worthy of death, you should be put to death for it. If a criminal gets away with doing something that's worthy of death, that is God's mercy. You should be put to death. But America has gone soft. America's so soft. We always want to be the good guys. They'll give him another chance 15 times. What? See what I mean? Now, in Romans 13, go read Romans 13. It says that a person, that the rulers of a government are supposed to be a terror unto evil works. In a mostly normal setting, the government of a country is supposed to exact vengeance in God's place as the judge. So all these catastrophes you see and happening in the world is because you have these countries that are not doing what God put those members of government there to do. The members of the government are supposed to exact wrath, judgment, and vengeance in God's place on evil. And if the government won't do it, God will do it. And that's why you see all these catastrophes happening. Yes, God is responsible for the weather. He's responsible for the hurricanes and the tornadoes and all that stuff. I'll put the verses on the screen so you can read them. The death penalty is given under the Noahic covenant. You got these soft Christians. No, the death penalty shouldn't be instituted. What are you talking about? Go and read the book of Numbers. I'll put the verse on the screen. If a land has people who die in it, you're supposed to put those people to death to atone for the blood in it. Because you're defiling the land if you just let people get murdered there and you don't have someone take vengeance. I know this is like an uncomfortable topic for a lot of people, but it's just the truth, man. I mean, it's only uncomfortable for people that don't deal with it, but it's in New York City, I can find you like how many articles. Guy gets let out of no cash bail, and he commits 40 crimes, 50 crimes, 65 crimes. I'm not even making up these numbers. Here, I'll put some on the screen so you can look at it. Seriously. So the death penalty has to be done. It has to be done. But you know, Tucker Carlson, he's literally a double Qatar agent. He works for Qatar as a propagandist. And at any other point in American history, that would have been charged for treason, and they would have had that person put to death in like 5 minutes. Well, not now, right? The evil men wax worse and worse. So this is given under this covenant. This is binding on everybody. In the millennial kingdom, you can't eat blood. Why? Because of this. See what I mean? Got nothing to do with the law of Moses. That's why you got to know you got to go by covenants. You got to go by covenants, man. Okay. Now notice why he says for the death penalty. Because in the image of God made he man. This is a common proof text to say that men are made in the image of God. But the image of God is Jesus Christ. All God is saying here is that he made, past tense. That's all it's saying. Now, even if you are in a fallen image, you still shouldn't kill somebody, because that wasn't your life to give. You take it away, you deserve to have yours taken away. What can you give to restore the life of someone that died? You can't. There's nothing you can physically give in a physical world to give life to a being who's part spiritual. You have a soul that's part of your spiritual. What can you give to redeem a soul? Nothing. So if you kill someone, you deserve to be killed. That's just how it is. That's why this is given under this covenant. That's all it is. All right. Now it says in verse 9, and God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, And I, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. See that? Verse 11, and I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off anymore by the waters of a flood. Verse 13, I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token, for a covenant between me and the earth. So one of the conditions of the covenant is that God will no more flood, no more worldwide flood. What is the proof of the covenant? The proof of the covenant is the rainbow. The rainbow. God set his bow in the clouds, and this is going to be a constant reminder that he's never going to burn up flood the earth again. So you know what God does in the second coming? He burns up the earth. You know what he does in 2 Peter chapter 3? He burns up the earth. If he can't flood it, he's going to burn it. He's going to burn it, dude. So all these guys are global warming. Oh, dude, the global warming is going to happen whether or not you want it. So anyway, so this is going to be the sign, the token that God will not flood the planet again. This is the token. And the way you know that all of this is still in effect, besides your conscience, is that this rainbow is proof of it. God says that is proof of it, that it'll happen. So let's keep going now. Okay. Now, I want to talk about salvation in this period. So, from Adam to Moses, we're under the patriarch dispensation. Now, you're going to notice that there is no written law. Nobody has the written Torah. Nobody. Okay? Now, how did people operate then if there's no written law? Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2. They're going to say in verse 12, for as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature these things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the mean, while accusing or excusing one another. So he's saying there in that chapter, referring to the Gentiles, that the Gentiles, so it's like this. The Gentiles, what don't they have? The written law. But what do they follow? He says that they follow their conscience. He says their conscience bearing witness. And because their conscience bears witness, and this is still doing what the written one is telling them to do, that in itself is a law. So they can't say, oh God, I just didn't know, I shouldn't have done that. No, because the fact that their conscience led them to do the right thing when they knew without knowing what this one told them to do is one and the same thing. That in itself is a law. Now, in the Old Testament, the reason why we say that this dispensation is conscience, it's faith and works by conscience. Why is it faith and works by conscience? Because there's no law given. So there's no law given. No one is born again. No one is spiritually circumcised. The blood of Jesus is not there. There's no body of Christ to put anybody in. Right? And they have a dead spirit. So no one's spirit is rejuvenated. The Holy Ghost doesn't come in there and make their spirit alive again, because that's not the case in the Old Testament. So what did I say earlier? God's going to deal with humanity mostly physically. See that? But now, in the Old Testament, in the Garden of Eden, Adam saw God one-on-one walking around in the Garden of Eden. Is there faith in the Garden of Eden? No, because faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. What is there to not see? He sees God walking around in the Garden of Eden. But now you get over here from Adam to Moses, and what's happening? Well, they see God sometimes as the angel of the Lord, but some of them don't even know it's the angel of the Lord. Right? And so you have this situation where people have to operate by faith. They're saved by grace through faith. With works, why? They still have to live after their conscience. I'm going to show you a lot of examples of this because there's no law given. Right? Go to Genesis chapter 20. We're going to look at a lot of examples of this. I'm going to show you how much of the Old Testament the Old Testament people in the book of Genesis know about the law of Moses, and they're doing things in the law of Moses with nobody telling them. Genesis chapter 20 and verse 2. And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, thou art but a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. Verse 4, but Abimelech had not come near her. Okay, so God is telling Abimelech, look, you took this woman, that woman is a man's wife, you're a dead man, right? And it says in verse 4, but Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, look at the question, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? Doesn't the New Testament say there are none righteous, no, not one? Why is he saying that his people are a righteous nation? Yeah, because they are. They are righteous, because this is not New Testament salvation. This is grace through faith before the law. This is not the same. What is the particular sin here that Abimelech is trying to give himself integrity before God of? You want to know what the law is? Leviticus 20. Go to Leviticus 20. Go to Leviticus 20. Leviticus 20 and verse 10. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. So notice how Abimelech has knowledge of Leviticus 20:10 here. He knew that he shouldn't have had Sarah. And in Genesis, he says, in the innocency of my hand have I done this. He wouldn't have tried to sleep with Sarah if he knew that from ahead of time that was Abraham's wife. Who told Abimelech that that's a sin? He said that his people were a righteous nation for not practicing this. Who told him that? Yes, his conscience did. Because he's a Gentile. Because he's a Gentile. It's faith and works by conscience. You gotta be careful. I'm gonna show you a lot of examples of this so that people just don't think that I'm like, oh, you're just copying another teacher. No, this is the Bible, dude. This is not nothing to do with other teachers. All right, let's look at another example. Go to Genesis chapter 26. Genesis 26. Genesis 26. Genesis chapter 26 and verse 4. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries. And in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed. Why? Because that Abraham hath obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Well, who told Abraham that? Abraham doesn't have a copy of the law of Moses. This is way before the law of Moses. How did Abraham keep God's commandments, statutes, and laws? Yeah, because it's written in his conscience. Because Paul already told you that in Romans chapter 2. Because it's faith and works by conscience. This is not New Testament salvation. Yes, it's grace through faith, but there's works accompanied with it. And I know what people are going to do. Well, the Bible says that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Yeah, and he had to build a boat. Would Noah have gone to heaven if he didn't build a boat? No. And actually, Noah didn't go to heaven. He went down to Abraham's bosom, right? Which is another thing. Nobody in the Old Testament goes to heaven when they die. They go to Abraham's bosom. So you can't say it's the same. You go to heaven when you die, when you're born again. These guys go somewhere else. They go down to hell. But they don't burn in hell. They're in paradise. Do you know what I mean? So Abraham here has God's statutes, laws, and commandments. Well, no one could have told him that with his conscience. But Paul said that because the Gentiles which have not the law, Abraham's a Gentile. The Gentiles which have not the law, but do by nature the things contained in the law, these things having not the law are a law unto themselves, showing the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience bearing witness. Their conscience bearing witness. You understand? You understand? Let's show you some more verses. We're gonna look at some more verses. All right, let's look at the book of Genesis chapter 38. This is the story with Judah and Tamar. Genesis 38. And it says in verse 23, and Judah said, let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after that, it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot. So she prostituted herself, right? Supposedly. Although you know the story. Judah is actually the one that slept with her. But anyway. And also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. By whoredom. So what is the judgment that Judah pronounces on Tamar? Bring her forth and let her be burnt. Burnt. Yeah, this is Genesis. Go to Leviticus 21. Leviticus 21. Leviticus 21 and verse 9. And if the daughter of any priest, if she profane herself by playing the whore, she profaneth her father, she shall be burnt with fire. Well, who told Judah that you should burn a person who whores himself with fire? Who told him that? Yeah, this did. This did. Conscience. You see what I mean? Because it's faith and works by conscience. Notice how these people have knowledge of the law of Moses and they've never seen the law of Moses. Because it's by conscience. See that? Okay, now, let's look at another example. Go to Job 42. Job 42. Job chapter 42. It says in verse 7 that it was so that after the Lord had spoken these words unto Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite. Eliphaz is a descendant of Esau. Okay, that's important information. My wrath is kindled against thee and against thy two friends, for ye have not spoken of me the thing that is right as my servant Job hath. Therefore take unto you now 7 bullocks and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer up yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you. Hold on. God is telling them to offer up burnt offerings. Well, who told these men that they should be doing that? Bible says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. He's telling them to offer up an animal sacrifice because they didn't humble themselves the way that Job did at the end of the book. Well, who told them that? Yeah, I know the verse is God is ordering them to, but that means that it's a normal practice to offer up animal sacrifices because it was. Now, how do you know that? Well, hold on a minute. Didn't Abel offer up sacrifices to God? Job is the first book in the Bible written. Job is before the law of Moses. Job is in the days of Abraham. Eliphaz the Temanite, he's a descendant of Esau. He's alive during the same period of time. Right? So who told Eliphaz the Temanite that this is normal practice? He didn't say, no, God, I've never killed an animal before. Yeah, because that's not it. Even in the beginning of the book of Job, he's offering up burnt offerings because he's not sure if his kids may have sinned in their heart. Yeah, who told them that? Yeah, their conscience did. That was a normal practice back then. Because some people just knew, hey, we're supposed to offer up animal sacrifices to God. So notice how you have the animal sacrifice system taking place before the law of Moses. That's because these are Gentiles. This is why God is so hard on the Gentiles. Because they ought to act like they don't know anything. Oh, God, Lord, I don't know. I'm a good person. I've never done that before. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never done that sin. Yeah, God gets mad at the Gentiles. They're not as stupid as you think. Conscience will not let a man off for sinning against God. It won't. All right, I got more examples. More examples of this being at play. All right, so we want to look at the book of Job 31. Job 31. He says in verse, so this is Job justifying himself, and he says in verse 38, if my land cry against me, or that my furrows likewise thereof complain. Okay, so a furrow is when you're farming, it's like a trench that you dig, like a really big trench. But he's saying that if the lie cry against me, and my furrows likewise thereof complain, why would Job say that? Why would the land cry against him? Why would the trench that he's digging complain? Well, I'll show you why. Notice how Job has knowledge of the law of Moses. Again, Deuteronomy 22. Look at verse 9. Thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with diverse seeds, lest the fruit of thy seed which thou hast sown and the fruit of thy vineyard be defiled. Thou shalt not plow with an ox and an ass together. Well, Job is saying, if the land cry against me, because who told him that this is the law? God told him. So in farming, you're not supposed to put different seeds together. It messes up the crop. You're not supposed to plow, according to the law of Deuteronomy, you're not supposed to plow with an ox and an ass together. Well, Job, justifying himself, says that if the land cried against me because of what I did to my furrows, who told Job that? Yeah, because it's conscience. And to confirm this, let's go to Job chapter 23. Look at this again. Job chapter 23 and verse 12. Neither have I gone back from the commandment of his lips, referring to God. I have esteemed the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. Wait, hold on a minute. Job esteems the words of God's mouth more than his necessary food. He had access to the words of God before it was written, dude. Now we know that God appeared to people in visions, but was God talking to Job every single day? I mean, it's possible. We don't know. But isn't that strange? He had access to God's words, little w, plural, before the law of Moses. Well, how did he do that? Go to Job chapter 6. Job chapter 6. Job chapter 6. It says in verse 10, then would I have comfort, yea, I would harden myself in sorrow. Let him not spare, for I have not concealed the words of the Holy One. He had access to God's words. How did he do that? Yeah, the same way Abraham did, through conscience. God said that Abraham kept his laws, commandments, and statutes. Well, how did he do that, dude? And Job is claiming the same thing. Twice. Yeah, because it's by conscience. It's faith and works by conscience. I want to show you actually something interesting about the Old Testament. In Old Testament, nobody had assurance of salvation. Nobody. Job chapter 10, in verse 21. Before I go, whence I shall not return, even to the land of darkness and the shadow of death, a land of darkness as darkness itself, and as the shadow of death without any order, where the light is as darkness. Job has no assurance of where he's going to go. He thinks that when he dies, he's going to go to the land of this darkness and the shadow of death. He has no idea where he's going to go when he dies. Right? Let's look at another verse. Job 14. Job chapter 14. Job chapter 14 and verse 9. Yet through the scent of water, the tree, will bud forth boughs like a plant. But man dieth and wasteth away. Yea, man giveth up the ghost. Look, and where is he? Is that New Testament salvation? Are you asking where you are? No, you know right now where you're going to go when you die if you're a saved Christian. You'll go to heaven. But Job says, yea, man dieth, yea, he giveth up the ghost, and where is he? That's not you, dude. Because this is not, this is the Old Testament, man. This is Old Testament, dude. You can't have them be the same. Now, I just want to show you something. He has no assurance of salvation. He has no assurance of where he's going to go when he dies. That's not you. That's not you at all, man. He has knowledge of the law. How did he do that, dude? Like I told you earlier, notice how Abraham has knowledge of God's laws in Genesis 26. Because in the Old Testament, and before the law is given, during the day of the patriarchs, salvation is by grace through faith plus works by conscience. Now, go to Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy 32. Let me show you something. Deuteronomy 32. Don't care what the traditional brethren taught. They're wrong. They're just wrong. Darby was wrong. Deuteronomy chapter 32. And okay, so in the Old Testament, there are only 2 mentions of the word faith. And this verse here is one of them. Deuteronomy 32, verse 20. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end shall be, for they are a froward generation, children in whom is no faith. What? Children in whom is no faith. The other reference is in Habakkuk 2:4. It says, the just shall live by his faith. He had to live by faith according to what God told him to do, which is works. So you go to the New Testament, and the term faith shows up over 250 times, because there's something different about the New Testament and the Old Testament, man. This whole thing about salvation is that people were looking forward to the cross and we're looking back. Man, you're just confused. That's not it. So we'll close it out on there. I wanted to do a little review. This is a little heavy, but it's just the way that it is. So Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. This is the innocence dispensation, but the covenant is given under that dispensation. Once they're kicked out, the covenant is still in effect for little babies. Now, once Adam and Eve come out of the garden, you are now entering what's called the patriarch dispensation, otherwise known as the fathers. That's what patriarch is referring to. And that dispensation stretches from Adam all the way, I didn't actually write it, to Moses. Now, it may be going from Adam to Moses, but the dispensation has subcategories that Bible believers like to split it up into, rightfully so. And it goes that when you have from Adam to Noah, and then when Noah shows up, you have his covenant that's given, and under Noah, you have government. He has his 3 kids. They split off into 3 regions of the world, and then they have their own respective governments, their own respective people, etc., etc. Now, from Noah, you have Abraham, and when Abraham shows up, the Bible believers like to split up into another subcategory called promise, because this is when God gives all of those promises to Abraham. Okay, now there's a very special reason why this is called promise that will be in the next video. Okay, now once you go after Abraham and you get to Moses, that is going to start a new dispensation. But hold on. Be careful. Even though salvation right now in this part of history is grace through faith plus works by conscience, here's something you need to think about as we start going into the later parts of the covenant. People are saved by grace through faith plus works by conscience. Who are the people that are under this? Gentiles. When Moses shows up and gives the law, are people no longer saved by grace through faith? By conscience? No, they still are. That's why you can't be hyper-dispensational. You see, the law is given under Moses. But do the Gentile nations have the law? No, dude. So when we start getting later into the series in covenant and dispensationalism, and we start discussing the law, yes, people were saved by grace through faith, but they were justified by the law of Moses. But not everybody had the law of Moses. So this is why you can't just say, well, people were saved by grace through faith under conscience only in the patriarch dispensation. You can't do that, because people were still being saved that way under the law. Not everybody had the law of Moses in the Old Testament when Moses shows up. Because the law of Moses was given to who? The Jews. The only way a Gentile had access to the law of Moses is if they were a proselyte. But there's an exception to the rule. So what you have is that as history goes on, here the Gentiles are saved by grace through faith plus works, faith and works by conscience. They're still being saved that way in the Old Testament. But when Moses shows up and the law is given, now the Gentiles have to come to the Jews to come get the law of Moses. You see how difficult it is? It's both. I'll draw it like this. We'll be discussing this more. So if you don't understand, don't worry too much. In this dispensation, you have people being saved by grace through faith plus works by conscience. Who are these people? Gentiles. Okay. Now, once Moses shows up, when we get to Moses in the later series, what's given? The law. Do the Gentiles have the law? No. So just because this dispensation ends doesn't mean that Gentiles are all of a sudden now saved by the law of Moses, justified by the law of Moses in the Old Testament. They couldn't be. They didn't have it. So you can't say, well, people were only saved by grace through faith, by conscience, and works only in the patriarch dispensation. That doesn't work, my dude. Because Gentiles are getting saved this way after when the law shows up. Because not every Gentile has the law in the Old Testament. So we'll be discussing that more when I start going into the law of Moses in this series. So last thing to cover, the Noahic covenant is binding until the end as well. The fear of animals, no eating blood, death penalty, no more worldwide flood. God gave the rainbow as a token that would take place, and this crosses all the dispensations also. This is why you have to go by covenants, okay? All right. So I'll close it out on there. Pray you got a blessing from the video. The next in this playlist is going to be the Abrahamic covenant. That covenant is very intricate and deep. So I'm going to try to get all the details right for you as best as possible. Pray you got a blessing from the video. Not much more to say. Make the board available. Grace be to you all.